What's up, everyone? Welcome back to C&D Sports. We've got NL Postseason Contenders for you today. We're going to break down everyone who we think does have a shot at a possible National League pennant. We have our AL Contenders video already out now. If you haven't checked that out, feel free to go check that out here. And let's not waste any time here. A few more teams. I think the NL is a little more competitive than the American League this year. So let's dive right in, and we'll start same format as last week. We'll start right from the top at who we think are the top or who is the top contender in the National League this year.
All right, and it looks like you have a repeat with the Atlanta Braves, or at least that's your favorite. Why is that?
They are my favorite, and I think I don't want to spoil last week's video, but I don't really think it's a spoiler. If you're watching baseball this year, you'll know that the Houston Astros are the best team in the American League. And I think for the reasons that I think they do everything well, and I think Atlanta does that the exact same in the National League side, from their lineup to their rotation to their bullpen, even down to the small details like their bench and some more depth areas. I think Atlanta is just an overall sound team. And this is a team right now that is still the top wild card team. And I have to give credit to the New York Mets for playing so well this year, but I think Atlanta could very well take over the Mets and be that team that has that automatic bye from the wild card series. But as of right now, they're slated to play the wild card, which isn't really an issue. It's more of a formality at this point. And we'll break down their lineup at the start here. I think they have the best top four in baseball right now. You could make that argument. I think when Ozzy Albies comes back, that they might start to shift towards their postseason focus, and where he was last year was at the top of the lineup because he was more of that prototypical leadoff hitter. Not that that's a huge deal in baseball anymore, as we'll see some teams in a few minutes that we talk about that don't have that prototypical kind of speedy, great hitting top of the order guy. But Ozzy Albies is certainly that guy, and he played well last year. I mean, they won a World Series. I can't argue him out of that first spot there. Ronald Acuna Jr., by all accounts, this is a down year for Acuna Jr. But he's still Ronald Acuna Jr. He's still one of the best young talents in baseball right now. So having him at the two in the DH spot, obviously still probably not 100% from that torn ACL that he suffered partway through last year. But it'll be exciting this year, him being in the lineup now, making an impact. He didn't get to do that last year in their World Series run. I'm curious to see what he can do this time around. And then Austin Riley is the guy who's really leading this lineup. I think he'll be a top three for NL MVP this year. You can certainly make some arguments for him at the top. And then Matt Olson, the Freddie Freeman replacement. How is that going to happen? How is that going to shift? No Freddie Freeman. Now it's Matt Olson. And I think the shift has gone very well. So I think that top four is lethal. And then there's still guys below that, like Travis d'Arnaud. Dansby Swanson's had a great year this year, too. Michael Harris is a monster. He's probably the least talked about guy in this lineup, but he very well should be the most talked about guy in this lineup. He does everything well. Center field has been something the Braves haven't necessarily had a whole lot of consistency over the years. And I think he brings that consistency. That's what warranted him to get that big contract extension. And then Marcell Ozuna and Robbie Grossman rounding that out. That is all sort of middle of the lineup guys from 1 to 9. And that is going to prove very useful when you come up against pitching rotations like the Dodgers and like the Mets later on. So this lineup overall, it's well-rounded, very similar to the World Series champion roster last year. And you look at their bench, and we're not even talking about the NLCS MVP from last year and Eddie Rosario. We're not talking about the all-star catcher in William Contreras or the promising breakout infielder in Vaughn Grissom. They have guys that can insert into that lineup very comfortably and have done that, especially guys like Vaughn Grissom who have come in and filled in admirably for Ozzy Albies. So their lineup overall is just stacked. I can't say anything bad about this lineup right now. And then we move to their rotation. Max Fried might be the best left-handed pitcher in baseball right now, was a huge reason why they won the World Series last year, really anchored that rotation and came in and night out and just shoved. Spencer Strider is in the mix for NL Rookie of the Year. He's a guy that they didn't anticipate on being in the rotation at the start of the year or even really being on their roster. Um, but Spencer Strider's come in and really been the second best guy in that rotation, has been very consistent all year. And Kyle Wright has been nothing but consistent this year. Charlie Morton, he's always seems to be at his best in the postseason, whether it was with the Rays in 2020 or last year with the Braves. Charlie Morton's built for the postseason, so I don't see any reason to doubt him in that case. So their rotation from their postseason rotation from 1 to 4, very consistent. And then we move to their bullpen. Now there was obviously some question marks. No Will Smith, Luke Jackson, that sixth inning guy last year. He's out what looks like to be out for the year. I don't think that's official yet. But how are they going to move on from that? Well, they move on by adding Kenley Jansen to their closing spot. They add Colin McHugh, who's been very consistent. He can fill that sixth inning role. And Raisel Iglesias, who's just a second closer for them, basically. They've made the moves that they needed to make in the offseason, or in Iglesias's case, at the trade deadline. Their pitchers, it's scary to think that as good as their starting pitching is, it might only have to go 4 innings, because you can go Matzik, McHugh, to Minter, to Iglesias, to Jansen. And I don't see where teams are going to comfortably hit against that. This team, I think they get overlooked right now because they are in that wild card spot. They had a slower start, but the Braves usually start the season slower, and then they really pick up steam towards the middle and the end of the season. And that's exactly what they're doing now. So I think this is arguably the most well-rounded bullpen. I think this is arguably the most well-rounded team. And they just have a great mix of guys in that pen, a great mix of guys in the lineup and in the rotation, just overall well-rounded. So I can't knock the Braves. I can't really say that the reigning world champions have done anything to take them off of that status.
Yeah, and totally fair. Now, if you're ready, we have the Los Angeles Dodgers. It's the second spot for contenders.
And it's a shame that I have to say the Dodgers are the second best team, because it's really a 1A, 1B kind of thing. I think the Braves just slightly nudged them out, and we'll get to why in a second, but it's not because of their lineup. The Dodgers will always bring a perfect mix of top end skill and deep postseason experience. And that's what this lineup shows. The Braves may have the best top four in the lineup. The Dodgers probably have the best top three, though. I think Matt Olson at the 4 is what really makes that top 4 stand out over Will Smith. But a top 3 of Mookie Betts, Trey Turner, and Freddie Freeman is disgusting. It is disgusting. And the fact that Freddie Freeman is probably going to have the chance to go toe to toe against his former team is something that I'm excited to watch, because Freddie Freeman is arguably having his best statistical year this year. And he's not even going to be up for the MVP because his teammate Mookie Betts is probably going to beat him out in that top 3 for MVP with Austin Riley and Paul Goldschmidt, who we'll talk about later when we talk about the Cardinals. Trey Turner's been one of the more underrated guys. He's due for a big money contract in free agency. And even struggling hitters like Max Muncy, who's hitting under 200 this year. Chris Taylor, who's hitting under 220 with a sub-2 WAR this year. Cody Bellinger, who's hitting under 200, or he was hitting at 200 again, but he's had multiple years of drop-off. But you look at those guys, Muncy was dominant, especially in the 2018 World Series run. They lost to Boston that year, but I mean, he's been dominant in postseason runs since then. Chris Taylor was instrumental last year in some of the earlier postseason rounds. And we talk about Cody Bellinger dropping off, but where did he drop off from? He dropped off from an MVP season. These are guys that, again, have that postseason experience, and just skill-wise, they're very capable of doing it. They've done it in the past, and I think the Dodgers find a way to get the best out of their guys when it matters most. I mean, this is still a team that's going to win over 100 games this year, so I can't say that, guys are struggling and it's really impacting this team, because again, the Dodgers find ways to win. They're like the Tampa Bay Rays, but just with a lot more money. They're the expensive Rays. They find ways to win. They'll plug different guys in the lineup in different spots. And this lineup, again, from 1 to 9, It's a tough line.
It's scary, and imagine if at some point it clicks, and you have
Exactly.
guys like Muncy, you have guys like Taylor and Bellinger popping off. This is, I mean, that's a very
If everyone can
unstoppable
click,
lineup.
they've got a former MVP in the 9 hole.
Yeah,
And that's just crazy to think of. So
yeah,
this is a lineup that again can go toe to toe with just about anyone in the MLB.
yeah.
And then
Now,
their rotation.
yeah, their rotation.
We'll start off with Julio Urias. I said Max Fried might be the best left-handed pitcher in baseball. You can certainly make the argument for Julio Urias. I think recently Julio Urias has been better than Max Fried, and he's just criminally underrated. This is a guy that could very well win the Cy Young this year. His numbers have just been almost video game numbers. And then we move to Clayton Kershaw. I've got the jersey up behind me here. This is a guy that, people had their doubts before he ended up, summiting that mountain and winning the World Series in 2020 of whether he could be the guy that could lead a team to, World Series glory. And he did. He hasn't pitched a lot this year. He's been injured. He's got low innings pitched, but when he has pitched, he's been solid. And Kershaw's Kershaw. You feel comfortable giving him the ball in a big game situation. I think in this case, it would be a game 2 situation. And then we move to Tony Gonsolin, who he's back from, if I hope he's back from injury in time. I'm predicting he will be. There has been some setbacks, but he's been one of the better stories this year. He's certainly in that Cy Young conversation. He was before the injury. I don't know if he's dropped off now, but he's had a fantastic year. And this is a guy that he's been one of those 4 inning kind of opener guys in the past, but he's really stepped into his own. His stuff is electric right now, and he finds ways to get outs. And then Tyler Anderson, I think he edges out Dustin May and Andrew Heaney, but they have 6 guys that could comfortably fit in a top 4 right now. I'd say Dustin May would be the 5th starter if Gonsolin can't go, but I think the Dodgers are going to do everything possible. They'll most likely get that first round bye, so they do have some extra time for Gonsolin to get healthy. But if he can't go, I think Dustin May would probably slot into that. And then we move to the bullpen, and this is where I think Atlanta separates themselves as that 1A, because I don't know if the Dodgers have that back end depth like we've been used to seeing the Dodgers having in their bullpen in years past. But I think Dustin May and Andrew Heaney could pose as great swing guys from the 3rd inning on. If a guy like Gonsolin isn't necessarily healthy enough and you don't feel comfortable putting him out there for 4+, 5+ innings, these are guys that could come in early on. Or again, there's always games where pitchers struggle in the postseason and managers can't hesitate to take them out. So these are guys that I think could be great swing guys to eat up 3-4 innings. And I think they could be valuable even though they're not in your rotation. I don't have Tommy Kahnle or Blake Trinan on here. Kahnle just returned. Blake Trinan is possible to return. If these guys are able to return, I think that the Dodgers have that bullpen depth at that point. But as it stands right now, Craig Kimbrell's done it in the past, but, Alex Vezia, Evan Phillips, Chris Martin, Caleb Ferguson, Phil Bickford, these are guys that, although they're having solid seasons this year, they don't necessarily have that pedigree that we're used to seeing Dodgers players have in the past. So I think if Kahnle and Trinan come back, if you can move those guys into more setup roles, with guys like Vezia and Phillips, who I think have done well in the setup role for Craig Kimbrell, you could very well, if Kimbrell struggles, which he has from time to time this year, you could move Blake Trinan into that closing role, very capable of closing. His slider is gross. The guy has great stuff. So if everything can get healthy, I think that they can move. I think that they can compete better with the Braves. But I think the bullpen is what separates the Braves from the Dodgers more.
All right, and those are probably the top 2 contenders, and there's a bit of a
Yeah.
drop off heading into the New York Mets, who you have at 3.
Yeah. As if you told me even a month ago, I think the Mets would probably be in that conversation with the Braves and with the Dodgers, but I think the Mets have taken some steps back in the past few weeks. Injuries have played a role in that. Obviously, Starling Marte, probably the bigger name there. Max Scherzer, the biggest name in the rotation. So they've definitely taken a few steps back, but I still think this is a strong Mets team that, on a bat, if the Braves and the Dodgers have a bad day, this is a team that could take advantage of that. And we'll start with the lineup right here. I do like the stability that this lineup has, and it's something that the Mets haven't had in the past is stable run production. We've seen guys like DeGrom get thrown out there, pitch a gem, and they still end up losing because this is a team that either doesn't put up runs or puts up maybe 1 or 2 runs at best. But they finally have that consistency thanks to Steve Cohen's large pockets and just going out and forking whatever he could to bring in top end talent to this team, and it's paid off because this lineup's good. We'll talk about the payoffs in the rotation in a second. This is a formidable top half of the lineup, kind of from 1 to 5. I really like, and they have solid bench production. Darren Ruff's going to be used as a platoon guy for Dan Vogelbach. Luis Guillorme, Mark Vientos, Thomas Nido is the backup catcher. I think they do have options if this lineup either struggles, or in the case of Starling Marte, if he's not ready to come back, because that's going to be key. Rounding out this lineup, is his hand, is his thumb going to be a problem moving forward? We shall see, but I really like this Mets lineup. The first time in a while I've liked this Mets lineup. But what I like more is that top end of that rotation.
Yeah, we've
Jacob DeGrom
been
and
talking about
Mac.
that since the off season.
Yeah, yeah. Jacob DeGrom and Max Scherzer are might be the 2 best pitchers in baseball. And anytime you throw DeGrom and Scherzer out for games 1 and 2, you expect to win games 1 and 2. So this is a team that if they do end up going into the wild card round, I feel pretty confident that they'll be fine. A best-of-3 series, you're only really going to need 2 games unless something goes horribly wrong, which I highly doubt when you have DeGrom and Scherzer going. The only thing I could see if Scherzer is a little slower from coming back from his injury, but he hasn't he hasn't really missed a step in the past when coming back from injury. If a guy's got good stuff, a guy's got good stuff when he's ready to go. So, and I don't want to discredit Chris Bassett and Carlos Carrasco either. They've had great years this year too. And I think that if DeGrom and Scherzer, if it comes to needing to go to Chris Bassett or Carlos Carrasco, I think you feel very comfortable, especially with that new lineup production now that has been introduced to the Mets this year. You feel comfortable with getting runs across the plate to really give these guys the run protection they need to go out and pitch their best. The only thing I see as possibly being an issue is they don't have a lefty in that rotation. I think their 4 best pitchers are righties. I don't think it really matters when you have DeGrom and Scherzer going out, because, again, that seems like 2 wins right there. And then we move to the bullpen. And we talk about DeGrom and we talk about Scherzer as being the best in their craft. I think Edwin Diaz this year is the best in his craft right now. He's anchoring this bullpen. He's the best reliever in baseball this year. And then you move to Ottavino and you move to Lugo and Givens and May. They all have potential to fill in late inning situations. And you can really see a potential playoff style 6th inning to 9th inning that every team seems to need from these 4 guys. And they can interchange in the spots that they go. But again, you feel pretty comfortable. I think Taijuan Walker is the first man out of the rotation. He could be, again, a reliable swing guy, like we talked about with the Dodgers, with Dustin May and with Andrew Heaney. He could be that swing guy if something does go wrong. It would probably more happen with Chris Bassett or Carlos Carrasco, but he's a guy that really could come in and eat up innings for you. I do think they lack the presence of a go-to postseason lefty that teams need to have in the past. need to have, and have had in the past. I think Alex Claudio, Joely Rodriguez, and David Peterson, maybe they could be those guys. I kind of hesitate towards David Peterson, especially with that awful start he had against the Cubs recently. But Alex Claudio is a guy that has had closing experience with the Rangers. Joely Rodriguez has had a solid year, but I just don't feel confident in that left-handed pitcher that can come in and get those big outs against lefties when you need him to. So that's probably the one knock I have on their bullpen. But when you have Diaz and you have those four guys after him, you should be okay, especially with that starting rotation.
A very strong dark horse. Now, moving on
Yeah.
to four, we got the St. Louis Cardinals.
And this is another team who I think could be a very strong dark horse too, the St. Louis Cardinals. And I think we start with their lineup here. They have a very efficient lineup, very efficient in run production, with guys like the rookie Brendan Donovan. You have Tommy Edman, Nolan Arenado, Tyler O'Neill, and of course the guy leading the charge, the NL MVP frontrunner in a lot of people's opinion, including my own, Paul Goldschmidt. Paul Goldschmidt is a Triple Crown threat. Obviously, he is that go-to guy. The Braves had it with Freddie Freeman. In the past, the Dodgers have had it with, you can name the amount of Dodgers players that have been that guy. Mookie Betts is the guy that comes to mind in particular, but they have that go-to guy in the lineup that can really be a difference maker. Paul Goldschmidt is a difference maker. And I like that their lineup is full of what I like to call middle of the lineup guys. You can get a lot of pop from 1 to 9, even Yadier Molina. The old man can still knock him out of the park here and there. And, that can be a big deal when you have guys that have that power, not even home run power, but just that extra base power, finding the gaps. I think that's huge. They have an efficient lineup that can keep the line moving, but can also be deadly in terms of just that raw power. And there's something about seeing Albert Pujols and Yadier Molina in the same lineup doing it again. And we'll talk about Adam Wainwright too in that rotation. It just brings back just such a happy sense of nostalgia for me. I wouldn't say I'm a Cardinals fan, but it's just kind of cool seeing these guys still being huge parts of the lineup at, they're in their late 30s, in some cases, Pujols' age. In Pujols' case, he's in his 40s right now, but they're still useful parts of a team. And I think back to that 2011 World Champion team, and that was just, I didn't think that Yadier Molina would still be kicking around 11 years later. I didn't think Wainwright would still be kicking around 11 years later. I didn't think Pujols would be around in 2022. I certainly didn't think he'd be back with the Cardinals, but he is back with the Cardinals. And, obviously he's still chasing 700 home runs. That's a different story, but he's been such a useful guy to this lineup in that DH spot there in more of a platoon role. But he is a guy that, again, has that postseason pedigree that can really be a difference maker. And I'm looking forward to seeing great storylines with these guys trying to do it one more time. Can they do it one more time? And we've mentioned it before. We talk about that nostalgic aspect. The old man, Adam Wainwright, is still anchoring the Cardinals bullpen, 11 years after their last World Series title. He is the guy that, if I'm Marmol, I'm giving him the ball game one, like last year. Obviously a different manager, but again, new manager, same outcome. You're giving the ball to Adam Wainwright game one because you do feel the most comfortable with him, especially having that postseason pedigree. He will be the guy game one in the NL wildcard series, no doubt. And then they have a more experienced rotation. I think it's probably, maybe including the Mets, it's probably the most experienced rotation, with guys like Jordan Montgomery, who they picked up at the deadline, Miles Michaelis, Jose Quintana, all guys that have been in big situations in the past. It's a comfortable rotation. I don't know if it blows you away, but it's definitely a comfortable rotation. Obviously, I didn't include Jack Flaherty on this list. I think he's obviously the youngest guy on this list. I think he has the most potential to be that anchor in the future, but he is having a down year. He's having a down year. It's been disappointing. I just don't see him being trusted in a rotation. I could see him shifting to the bullpen, and we'll get to that when we move to the bullpen. But overall, I do like the experience of this rotation. And I think this is a rotation that you can't sleep on. It doesn't have that star power like the first three teams we've talked about have, but it certainly has the consistency that they have, and they're all guys that can find ways to get outs. And then we move to their bullpen here. I like the back three of Ryan Helsley, Giovanni Gallegos, and Jordan Hicks, all guys that could potentially fit in that closer style profile. Um, I really like them. It's after that that I think the question marks come up. I think they're missing that impact lefty, like I talked about with the Mets, like I talked about with teams in the American League. They do lack that big lefty presence out of the arm barn. That's where I think their shortcomings could come. And but like I mentioned before, I think Jack Flaherty has a chance to beat, obviously, he's not a lefty, but to be a big guy, to be maybe a swing guy out of the pen, maybe he could be that sixth inning cover. I think you could really get creative with using Jack Flaherty's stuff here, maybe putting him in late game situations, maybe putting him as more of a swing guy. But I think Jack Flaherty, although not in the rotation, it might be disappointing as a Cardinals fan not to see this guy that you'd expect to be your best pitcher at this point to be in that postseason rotation. But I think he still has a role on this team, and I would definitely get creative because creativity is what you're going to need to beat teams like the Braves and like the Dodgers. So
Definitely. Another team, formidable. You got the Philadelphia Phillies.
and this is where I see we talked about that step from the Braves and the Dodgers. This is where I see the step going down, from the Mets and from the Cardinals. The Phillies do take that step down, but I look at teams that have won it in the past. I didn't think the Nationals would win it in 2019, and they did. And I think the Phillies and the team we're going to talk about next, I think are both better than that team. So I have to include them. I can't sleep on them. The Phillies are a good ball club. I think they just lack certain amounts of consistency. But I do think that if we look at their lineup now, I do think that lineup gets that consistency back by getting Bryce Harper back from injury. He's been huge. In the past few weeks that he has been back, he really shifts this team from a postseason member to a postseason contender. I like Kyle Schwarber at the top of the order. We talked about Ozzie Albies with the Braves being that prototypical leadoff hitter. Kyle Schwarber's not that guy. Kyle Schwarber's not a quick guy. He's not a quick guy. He's not necessarily a guy that lives to get on base, but he is a guy that can hit, and he is a guy that can hit for power. And he has been a different look at the top of the order than baseball has seen in the past. And that's where he thrives. He thrived with the Red Sox at the top of the order last year. He's thrived with the Cubs being, at the top of the order. I think Kyle Schwarber, he offers a unique look that pitchers they don't see often, so they don't expect. They can prepare with film, but when you're out there facing Kyle Schwarber is in the top of the first inning, I think that can be a daunting task for even the best of pitchers because he does have that immense raw power that he can take you 450 plus feet if you make a mistake to him. So I do like that look at the top of the order. I think outside of the lineup, though, and even towards the lower end of the lineup, it does run thin. And I think if this lineup gets cold, it kind of gives me a loose reminder to that Brewers team last year. The Brewers were a phenomenal team last year. I had them, I think last year when we made our postseason predictions, I had them going to the World Series. Obviously, my World Series prediction that year of Brewers White Sox did not happen. But this was a team that I thought, had everything going for them. And then they just didn't show up. That Braves series was, a historically low scoring series all around. And this was a Brewers team that, had a lot of talent that they could put runs across and they didn't. And I think the Phillies are kind of that same thing. You look at Nick Castellanos has gotten cold at times. Everyone in this lineup has gotten cold at some point. And I worry that when you play better teams like the Mets, like the Braves, like the Dodgers, I think that could be an issue for them. So I do worry a bit for that team. But again, they all have guys that are capable of doing it. It's the consistency that I worry about.
The struggle is a lot of teams that can go cold is when you're facing the best pitch or when you're facing such your playoff rotations.
Yeah.
It's hard to heat up. So that's one thing to be wary of with the Phillies and really any team that just isn't deep like our top three.
When you're in the same league as DeGrom, Scherzer, Arias, Fried, the list goes on. It's a strong pitching league, the National League is, and I think that could be an issue for the Phillies. But again, just talent wise, I can't discount them. This is a team that, could catch a team on a bad day or on a bad series and take advantage. And I think the rotation helps with that. As Aaron Nola has had that, he is that ace status. He's a stud this year. He's been fantastic. And then we move down to Ranger Suarez, who I really think he's taken the bull by the horns and has really made a spot in this rotation for himself and made himself comfortable in this rotation as being the second best player, second best pitcher in this rotation here. He gives them that impact lefty look that's going to give opposing lineups obviously something different. When you move from Nola, Syndergaard, Gibson, although it's different degrees of effectiveness, it is still seeing a right-hander. So when you can switch it up and have that impact lefty in their rotation, I think in the playoffs especially, it makes a difference. Ranger Suarez is a guy that I don't think the Phillies had that left-handed arm that really blew you away in that lineup. But the past few months, he's been just someone that is very hard to hit against. And he is a guy that if you're looking for in a possible must-win situation, if you're going up against DeGrom and Scherzer with the Mets, you're going up against Arias with the Dodgers, you're going up against Fried with the Braves, you're probably not going to win game one. So you need to look at what's your best chance of winning game two. Who gives me that best chance despite Aaron Nola's best efforts, in game one? And I think it's Ranger Suarez over guys like Syndergaard and Gibson. Although they have been consistent, um, they have been these two guys have been relied upon in the past in postseason situations. But it's just a matter of time of can they be relied upon? If you get game two, do you feel comfortable giving them the ball? You have to give one of them the ball, but do you feel comfortable giving them the ball in a possible must-win situation against the Braves or the Cardinals? That remains to be seen. They're guys that have done it in the past and have been solid contributors to their respective teams in the past. But do you feel comfortable? That's where I think there is a drop off from the second man in the rotation. But again, if Noah Syndergaard, I think would be that guy. I think he'd probably be because he's done it in the past. He's been on that World Series run in 2015, obviously losing to the team I got up in the back there, my childhood Kansas City Royals. But he has been trusted in the past, and I think Syndergaard would probably be the guy to go to game three. But again, I could see Kyle Gibson being that guy too. The rotation, there are some question marks around it, though. I will say that. And then we move to probably my favorite part of this Phillies team, and it's the bullpen. I think it's a very underrated bullpen. I think they have a lot of guys that are capable of doing different things. I think they have that sixth to ninth inning covered that playoff teams look for with Brad Hand, Jose Alvarado, David Robertson, of course, the closers, Sir Anthony Dominguez. I think they have lots of high leverage closing situations covered as well. With Sir Anthony Dominguez, who's obviously been their closer the past few years. He's been the closer this year. David Robertson was in a closing situation or was in a situation to close every day with the Cubs before being acquired at the deadline. He's been a closer with the White Sox in the past. He's been in closing situations even with Tampa Bay last year. And Brad Hand, again, he's been a closer for teams like Cleveland. He's been a closer for teams like San Diego. He has had closing experience in the past, which I think when you have those guys in high leverage situations, it only stands to help your bullpen moving forward. I really like this bullpen. Do they have that impact lefty that I've talked about? I think beyond that, though, you get a little sketched out. If Syndergaard and Gibson get hit around, do they have that guy that can come in? Can Zach Eflin or Nick Nelson be that guy? I'm not entirely sure. But I think if their pitchers can go 5 innings, that's all you need them to go because you feel pretty comfortable going with Brad Hand in the sixth and then moving down the line.
Rounding it out, we have the San Diego Padres.
And the Padres are a team that they're cutting it close right now. As it stands right now, I believe it's only they're only 3 games up, maybe even 2 games. I don't recall exactly, but they're 2 or 3 games up on the Milwaukee Brewers, and this Padres team should be better than the Brewers this year. Um, but yeah, they're a team that I don't feel comfortable with, but they have the talent that you definitely can't sleep on them. When you've got guys like you look at their lineup, you've got guys like Juan Soto, Manny Machado, and Josh Bell as their 2, 3, 4. That's a postseason 2, 3, 4. That's a World Series caliber 2, 3, 4. I think 2 through 6 has immense potential too, with Jake Cronenworth and Brandon Drury rounding out that 2 through 6 there. Brandon Drury, if we hone in on him, he is a guy that could be capable of being that X factor that every great postseason team seems to have. That one you look last year, Eddie Rosario and Jorge Soler were those guys. They were deadline acquisitions for the Braves. Brandon Drury could be that guy. He can move all around, kind of all around the infield, the corner outfields he's got covered. As of right now, I kind of see him as being more of a DH because I think defensively there are better options than him. But his bat has the potential to be that X factor for them. But I'll say it again, this lineup does have a big what if factor. What if Tatis hadn't tested positive for PEDs? Because if you put Tatis in that lineup, this is a team I'm shooting up the ranks, probably just
Around
in
the
and around,
Dodgers.
probably around the Dodgers. I'd probably
Yeah.
say around the Mets, but you could even consider this team around the Dodgers if you have a 2, 3, 4, 5 of Juan Soto, Manny Machado, Fernando Tatis, and Josh Bell in no particular order. That's the thing that World Series are made of right there. But again, he did test positive. He's not here, so they're going to have to move forward. I think they do have the talent that you can't sleep on them. But again, that's a huge gaping hole that they've had to fit. They had to kind of fill as a stopgap this year. Obviously, he was out early on with an injury, didn't make an appearance all year for them. But they were just trying to get to that point where let's just get to when we can get Tatis back and this team will really skyrocket. And just as he's doing his rehab assignments, gets that positive test and he's not coming back. So I think the Padres really have to hunker down here and find a way to win ball games. And I think they have the talent to do so, but that remains to be seen if they can do it. And then we move to their rotation. And I think there are still a lot of question marks in this rotation. This isn't the same rotation that we saw at the start of the year. I think the vulnerabilities of this rotation have kind of come into the light. But when this rotation is on, it can be lethal. When you go from Darvish to Snell to Musgrove to Clevenger, these are all guys that could be aces in a lot of rotations for a lot of different teams in the MLB. To have them all on the same team when they're at their best, again, lethal. But there's a question of what type of players are you going to see? And I look specifically at the top. Which Yu Darvish are we going to see? Are we going to see that the Texas Rangers Yu Darvish, or that 2020, or kind of the 2020 Yu Darvish where he was up for the Cy Young? Or are we going to see that 2017 World Series Game 7 Yu Darvish where he was not effective and the Astros ended up capitalizing? Or a 2021 Yu Darvish where at one point you could argue he was the worst pitcher in baseball last year? He's been great this year. The stuff's been on. He is the guy that, in a wild card series, game one against what looks to be the Cardinals, you trust him with the ball, but how much you trust him, I think, remains to be seen because, again, we've seen so many different sides of you, Darvish. And I think that goes for guys like Blake Snell and Joe Musgrove, too. Joe Musgrove was a guy at the start of the year. I thought he was in the driver's seat within the first 2.5 months of the year for the Cy Young. And then he's kind of got his extension. He was still pitching well. I think he deserved that extension. I don't think he's been a bad pitcher. He's still been a good pitcher, but he's been a guy that he's been teetering more towards average, to that good average that you're looking for in a middle of the rotation guy. I think Blake Snell, there's some question marks here, but again, when all of these guys are on, they are on. And that 4 spot there, whether it's Clevenger or whether it's Manaea, I still think there's something left to be desired based on the poor seasons, especially with Sean Manaea, that they've had this year. but I do think those guys could have a role in the bullpen, and we will look at the bullpen now. The big name in there is Josh Hader. In the past, he's been the best reliever in baseball. I don't think he's that this year. I think he has struggled specifically since the trade over at the deadline from the Brewers. I think Josh Hader, but he is a guy that when he's on, he is on, and he has shown up in the postseason in the past. So I still have some level of comfort knowing that. But again, he needs to find it and he needs to find it fast. But he can be that impact lefty that I keep preaching here that teams need. He could be that guy. I think you feel a little more comfortable though with his shortcomings, having Nick Martinez and Luis Garcia having the seasons they're having. They've been very solid setup guys. That if he can't be the guy, if Hader can't be the guy, you can move a guy like Nick Martinez into that closing role if it comes to that. And I look at Sean Manaea, who I have off of their rotational four. I think he could be an important guy if a guy like Clevenger can't get innings. He offers a left-handed look too. Maybe he can be kind of a second impact lefty if he's on the roster. Obviously, I don't think it's guaranteed that he'll be on the roster with the season he's had. But again, Sean Manaea, if he's on the roster, I think could play a role if the shortcomings of this rotation do come out.
Yeah.
But overall, I think all of these teams on any given day, they could win a pennant. They could go to the World Series. I think they have the talent. This is a very talented 6 teams with a lot of big stars in it. Very excited to watch what unfolds here. In October baseball in the National League. Very excited.
All right. Well, there you have it. Those are Caleb's picks for the NL contenders. If you want, go back and watch our AL contenders video, and we'll continue on for the next 2 weeks. We'll talk about the wild card race in both leagues. So stay tuned for that.
We'll also talk about the AL Central last week. Obviously, we didn't mention the AL Central in the videos. Again, sorry, another spoiler, but still do go check out that AL Contenders video. We'll mention them in the wild card race too, because a lot of those teams are in the wild card race, but that division is still very tightly contested.
Yes. So stay tuned. We'll be around. Let us know what you think about our picks. Like, comment, subscribe, share with your friends and family. See you soon.
Nice.
Peace.
I like that.